members of his family said. And that, of course, will never be forgiven. But actually, there was sort of several examples of her being rude to staff. I mean, I heard, that she was rude to the gardener, the under gardener, and the head gardener reported this to the Queen. The Queen got into her car and drove down and ticked her off because you're not to be rude to staff. And what also where I lost it was when this kind of crazy business of Archie being born, and she's the only woman, as far as I know, if you look at the timeline, who gave birth and then subsequently went into labour later in the day.
What did the late Queen Elizabeth II really think and feel about the biggest royal issues of our time and the quite pesky Prince Harry and Meghan Markle? Well, Hugo Vickers is one of our generation's foremost historians, specialising in the British royal family. His new book, Queen Elizabeth II, A Personal History, is based on 60 years of the most personal observation and detailed research.
The Queen of England got into her car, personally, drove herself down, and went face-to-face with Meghan Markle to tell her, in no uncertain terms, that you do not speak to my staff that way. This didn't come from a tabloid. This didn't come from a royal insider with an axe to grind. This came from a man who sat across from Queen Elizabeth II over 40 times across 6 decades. A historian with access no journalist ever had. And what he's now revealing about the final years of her reign, and the role Harry and Meghan played in them, is something the palace would have preferred stayed buried.
Yes, well, what I was sad about was that, the Queen did have this absolutely fantastic reign of 70 years. And at the time of her Platinum Jubilee, she should have been sort of sailing into sunlit uplands. And instead of which, she had problems of Prince Harry and Meghan. She had problems with the government, with Brexit and all those things, and her health, obviously, and Prince Andrew and things like that. And it was very sad that the last years were rather sort of overshadowed by that. But of course, it's only a small part of a very, very much bigger picture, the whole reign, which of course I did find absolutely fascinating. And I think we were incredibly lucky to have her for so long. And I can't think of a reign in history in which, under any political or economic circumstances, I would have preferred to live.
100%. I mean...
So who exactly is Hugo Vickers? He's not a gossip columnist. He's not a palace press officer spinning a narrative. He's one of Britain's most respected royal historians. With over 60 years of personal research and more than 40 private meetings with the late Queen, the first taking place in 1968, when she was still a young mother. His new book, Queen Elizabeth II, A Personal History, is being called one of the most significant works on the British monarchy ever written. And the bombshells inside it? They are only just beginning to surface. Here's what the book reveals that changes everything. It wasn't just Prince William who tried to pump the brakes on Harry and Meghan's relationship. William has taken the heat for years, accused in Harry's memoir Spare of being cold, dismissive, even cruel. But Vickers confirms it was far wider than that. Prince Charles gave Harry the same warning Lord Mountbatten once gave him before his courtship of Diana: have fun, but do not marry her. And the Queen herself? She asked Harry to wait a full year before committing. The entire senior royal family had doubts, every single one of them. And here's the part that will make your jaw drop. Harry, according to Vickers, almost certainly told Meghan exactly what each family member said.
Is that almost certainly, and listen, this is just speculation on my part, is that Prince Harry will have told Meghan Markle what members of his family said. And that, of course, will never be forgiven. If he said, look, William has said, steady on or something, she'll have held that against him. And I think that's been part of the problem, But anyway, that's what happened. I mean, that wedding, were you around? I was very much around in Windsor when that. And of course, the goodwill towards them was enormous, despite the rather terrible aspects that some of that wedding had. And the crowds were out in force; you could hardly move for it. And what is so interesting is that she very quickly turned that round. Now she would say that she had, had a bad time from the British press. And I know what the British press do. They build people up and then they knock them down a bit. But actually, there was sort of several examples of her being rude to staff. I mean, I heard, that she was rude to the gardener, the under gardener, and the head gardener reported this to the Queen. The Queen got into her car and drove down. And
Every warning, every hesitation, every private conversation. And that, says Vickers, is something that will never be forgiven. But it gets darker. When the Oprah Winfrey interview aired in March 2021, the world watched in shock. Racism allegations, mental health claims, a family painted as cold and calculating. What the public didn't fully know until now is the state Prince Philip was in at that exact moment. Vickers reveals that Philip's medical team had nearly lost him. Twice. He was fighting for his life inside a hospital, isolated from the Queen under strict COVID protocols. While Harry and Meghan gave the most explosive televised interview in royal history, Philip died just weeks later.
Here, and it connects to the Oprah Winfrey interview because, of course, Hugo, that was a devastating moment, right?
Yeah.
What they did, it was like throwing this grenade into the British royal family and false accusations of racism, let's be very clear. But at the time, the royal family didn't know what type of damage it would do and all of that. But one of your key revelations in this book, and it's something that I have always criticized Harry and Meghan for, was going ahead with this interview knowing how unwell Prince Philip was. And you actually reveal, Hugo, that it was worse than what people even knew at the time. And that his medical team reported to nearly losing Prince Philip twice. And yet Prince Harry and Meghan Markle still decided to allow the interview to go ahead.
Well, the really sad thing is, I mean, with what happened when COVID came along, Prince Philip was living mostly at Wood Farm at Sandringham, where he was
Yes.
having a nice time. He was for painting and reading and carriage driving and so on. The Queen used to go up there from time to time. And then when COVID came, she quite rightly brought him back to Windsor Castle very quickly. So they spent more time together in Windsor Castle in the last year and a half or so of their lives than they had done because each one was moving around a lot. So anyway, so then you get this situation which is very sad that he had to go into hospital, and so off he went. And yes, they did really nearly lose him twice. And as you know, he then eventually came back to Windsor Castle. It took a long time to get him back because the nurses had to be absolutely COVID free. That was the point. And so they had to be isolated and so forth. And for this interview to go ahead at this particular moment, and as we know, in retrospect, of course, he died very soon afterwards. Well, I think that's very shocking. And
Line. Recollections may vary, a phrase that said everything without saying anything at all. And then there's the question that nobody in the establishment wants to answer directly. Did the stress of Megxit 5 Vickers calls it a disgraceful exercise? And he's not alone. The palace issued its now legendary sickly harm the Queen?
very hard to say, isn't it? I mean, if you think about it, the death of Prince Philip, of course, would also have had a big effect on her because
And
they
it
were
did.
so incredibly strong together. And he was so argumentative because by being argumentative, you get to a conclusion. If you just agree with everybody meekly, you don't get anywhere. But he liked to say, I mean, every time something came up, it was like, have you thought about doing it this way? Have you thought about doing it that way? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And then, of course, to lose that, to begin with, what happened was that she was very, very sensible, I think, at the age of very nearly 95. She didn't sort of go into a long period of mourning. She kept going. But I think if she'd retreated, she might have found that very difficult. But my theory, and it's only a theory, is that when she went up to Scotland in the summer, it hit
Yes.
her, because grief always does. And she looked terrible when she came back down to Windsor in October of 2021. And then, of course, things started to go wrong, as you know. And she was lucky that she was able to get through the Platinum Jubilee, and she was determined to do so. But there were one or two indications that they were very nervous about her health, one of which was that literally on the 1st of January, she appointed Camilla to the Order of the Garter and Tony Blair. on the grounds that, it was much easier if she appointed Tony Blair than leaving it for Prince Charles to do so when he became king. And they were frightened. Normally, the Garter Knights announced on the 23rd of April. So they were worried that she might not actually survive until then, which she did, as you know, right through till September. So as to the effect that these other issues had, it's not really for me to say what effect, but they can't have done good. They didn't they certainly didn't help matters. Let's put it like that. And I think, stress is very difficult, and it's just actually just run.
Vickers stops short of saying it outright, but he doesn't deny it either. He simply says, they certainly didn't help matters. There are members of the British royal family who privately believe that. Sustained stress accelerated damage to those around them. The Queen's decline accelerated after Philip died. And the pressure Harry and Meghan placed on her, the demands, the interviews, the access battle. The photograph concerns were a constant backdrop to her final years. The Queen had a lady-in-waiting present every single time Harry and Meghan visited with the children.
Photographs which they could subsequently use.
There's some other really fascinating stuff about the early days of the Harry and Meghan courtship in your book, Hugo. I just wanted to talk about these because for a long time, it's been William who has been blamed as the one who told Harry, oh, slow down, what are you doing, mate? Like, calm it down, take some time. Is she really the one? And William has had to cop a lot of that, Hugo, right? He copped it from Harry and Spare and, but what is so interesting about your book is you make it clear that it wasn't just William. You actually report that Charles, then Prince Charles, took the line that Lord Mountbatten had taken with him before he started courting Princess Diana, which was have fun, but don't marry her. And you also report, Hugo, and this was new and really fascinating, that the Queen herself suggested that Harry should wait a year. So,
not as a formality, as a safeguard, to prevent them from taking photographs that could later be used publicly. Think about that. The most powerful woman in the world felt she needed a witness in the room with her own grandson. As for Meghan's behavior during those early years, Vickers doesn't mince words. The Gardner incident is now confirmed. Meghan was rude.
Because you're not to be rude to staff. And where I lost it was when this kind of crazy business of Archie being born, and she's the only woman, as far as I know, if you look at the timeline, who gave birth and then subsequently went into labour later in the day. And then, of course, wouldn't tell us who the godparents were. Frankly, I couldn't care less who the godparents were, but I do think one ought to, why don't you just tell us, So you could see she was kind of had her own agenda. But what I didn't think she would do is to, I never thought she'd stay, to be honest, but I never thought she'd do it in the reign of the Queen, but she was prepared to do that. That's what I find unforgivable. That's why I make those remarks.
Why was she so weird around the birth of Archie? Because again, I was at The Sun at the time, and I posed a whole load of questions to her team, her communications team, and it never made any sense. They lied. They lied about the time. They lied about the location. It was so weird.
The head gardener reported it to the Queen, and the Queen drove herself down and delivered the correction personally, quietly, directly, with no drama. That's the woman they were dealing with. And yet somehow, in California, the story became that they were the victims. So here's the question no one in Hollywood will ask. When a woman who survived war, buried a husband, held a nation together for 70 years, and still had the grace to discipline quietly rather than publicly, when that woman is the one left distressed in her final years, who exactly is history going to judge?
He's a sort of national pariah now. When he was asked to step down, he did step down. He didn't write a spare book. I mean, to be honest, you have hardly heard from him since. But, so she was worried about what was going to happen to him later. And all I can say really is what a relief that she didn't live long enough to see what actually did happen to him.
Gosh, she would have been horrified by this, wouldn't
Yeah,
she?
she would.
What about that moment when she got him to usher her to her seat at the
It,
memorial service for Prince Philip. Was that some type of sign to the world? This is my son, I stand by him.
I think it's simpler than that. I got into a lot of trouble because I was asked to come in.
Subscribe to Celebzeno right now, because the rest of this story, including why the Queen didn't want to be alone during phone calls with Harry, is a conversation that is far from over.